Bikers harass overweight woman at bar, unaware she's a Navy SEAL veteran. The morning sun cast long shadows across Eagle's Rest Farmers Market as James Cooper arranged his produce stand, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. The weight he'd gained since leaving Delta Force showed in his measured movements, but his eyes remained sharp, constantly scanning his surroundings out of habit. The scent of fresh vegetables and warm bread filled the air, mixing with the earthy aroma of locally grown flowers. The rumble of motorcycles shattered the peaceful atmosphere. 5 leather-clad figures from the Storm Riders rolled into the market's parking lot, their chrome gleaming menacingly in the morning light. Lance Python Kingston led the pack, his snake tattoo visible on his neck as he dismounted. The local vendors tensed, some quietly packing their goods, others pretending not to notice. Python and his crew swaggered through the market, knocking over displays and threatening anyone who dared protest. When they reached Cooper's stand, Python knocked an entire crate of tomatoes to the ground, grinning as they splattered across the pavement. "Looks like someone needs to learn about protection money," Python sneered, towering over Cooper. "Hate to see anything happen to your nice little setup here." Cooper remained still, his farmer's hat low over his eyes. 8 years of maintaining his cover had taught him patience, but beneath his calm exterior, tactical assessments ran through his mind. 5 hostiles, 3 armed, 2 exits, civilian presence. When Python grabbed his collar, Cooper allowed himself to be pulled forward, using the movement to note the pistol poorly concealed under Python's jacket. "I'm talking to you, fat man," Python growled. Cooper's lips twitched slightly. They had no idea they'd just stumbled into an operation that would expose their entire weapons trafficking network. His cover as a simple farmer had finally paid off. These were the very men he'd been waiting for. Have you ever witnessed someone seriously underestimate the wrong person? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more incredible tales of justice served. Python's grip tightened on Cooper's collar as the other Storm Riders circled around, their boots crunching through scattered tomatoes. The market had gone eerily quiet, save for the rumble of idling motorcycles in the distance. Cooper counted 4 more bikes pulling up outside, reinforcements arriving right on schedule. "Last chance, old man," Python hissed, his snake tattoo writhing as he spoke. 500 a week keeps your vegetables fresh and your bones unbroken." Cooper's eyes flickered to the gathering crowd. Sarah Martinez from the flower stand was already on her phone, likely calling the sheriff, exactly what he didn't need right now. 8 years of intelligence gathering couldn't be derailed by well-meaning locals. "Look," Cooper said, letting a tremor enter his voice, playing up the scared farmer act. "Business hasn't been good. Maybe we can work something out next week." One of the riders, a massive man with brick tattooed across his knuckles, laughed and kicked over Cooper's display of fresh corn. The yellow ears scattered across the pavement like fallen soldiers. Cooper forced himself to flinch, even as his mind cataloged Brick's poor balance and the way he favored his right leg. "Hear that, Python? Man wants to negotiate." Brick cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the tense air. "Maybe we should show him our terms and conditions." Python released Cooper's collar with a shove, sending him stumbling back against his truck. The movement gave Cooper a perfect view of the newest arrivals for more Storm Riders, including one he recognized from his intelligence files. Marcus "Ghost" Williams, the Storm Riders' weapons supplier. Cooper's pulse quickened. Ghost's presence confirmed his suspicions about today's shipment. "You know what?" Python reached into his jacket. "I'm feeling generous. Let's give you a demonstration of what happens when people don't appreciate our protection." The metallic glint of brass knuckles caught the morning sun. Cooper's muscles coiled, ready to respond, but he held back. He needed them to escalate, needed to maintain his cover until they revealed more about their operation. Each moment of humiliation was another thread in the web he'd been weaving for nearly a decade. A commotion arose from the market's entrance as 2 local truckers, regulars at the market, started moving toward Cooper's stand. Tom Baker and his brother Mike, both built like refrigerators and well-meaning to a fault, were about to complicate everything. "Hey!" Tom's voice boomed across the market. "Leave him be." Cooper bit back a curse. The situation was spiraling, pushing toward violence before he'd gathered the intel he needed. Ghost was already backing toward his bike, and Cooper couldn't risk letting him slip away. He needed to regain control of the situation without revealing his capabilities. Python spun toward the approaching truckers, brass knuckles catching the light. "Well, looks like we've got some heroes in Eagle's Rest." His voice carried across the market, drawing fearful glances from the remaining vendors. "Boys, show these fine gentlemen what happens to heroes." 3 Storm Riders moved to intercept the Baker brothers, while Ghost lingered near the exit, speaking quietly into a cell phone. Cooper caught fragments of the conversation, warehouse and schedule, before Ghost's voice was drowned out by the sound of breaking glass as Brick swept an entire display of mason jars onto the ground. The Baker brothers stopped short as the bikers approached, finally seeming to realize they were outnumbered. Mike's hands went up in a placating gesture, but Tom stood his ground, jaw set beneath his thick beard. Cooper recognized the look. Tom had done 3 tours in Iraq before settling into trucking. He wouldn't back down easily. "Think real careful about your next move," one of the bikers growled, pulling a chain from his belt. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Cooper watched Ghost slip away, heading toward the industrial district. The timing lined up with his intelligence. The weapons shipment would be arriving at the abandoned Millbrook warehouse within the hour. He needed to end this confrontation quickly, without revealing his training. "Tom," Cooper called out, forcing a quaver into his voice. "It's okay. Just go on now. I'll handle this." Python laughed, turning back to Cooper. "Listen to the fat man. He's starting to understand how things work around here." He gestured to his men. "Teach our hero truckers a lesson anyway. Make sure everyone in this market remembers what happens when people don't mind their own business." The first punch caught Tom in the gut, doubling him over. Mike moved to help his brother, but took a chain across the back that dropped him to one knee. The sound of the assault echoed through the market, punctuated by gasps from onlookers. Cooper's fingers dug into his palms, every instinct screaming to intervene. Instead, he forced himself to cower against his truck, playing the helpless farmer even as his mind recorded every detail. The way Python kept checking his phone, the hand signals between the riders, the nervous energy in their movements, something big was happening today. The weapons shipment wasn't just another delivery. This was different. Sarah Martinez was still on the phone, her voice rising in panic as she described the scene to the police. Cooper knew the local sheriff was 20 minutes out at best, and the state police would take even longer. By then, Ghost would have plenty of time to complete whatever transaction was happening at the warehouse. Python approached Cooper again, clearly enjoying his moment of power. "See what happens when people try to help you." He grabbed a handful of Cooper's flannel shirt. "Now, about that protection money. I'm thinking the price just went up. $1,000 a week sounds better, don't you think?" Behind Python, the Baker brothers were on the ground, groaning but alive. The other Storm Riders were trashing the remaining stands, sending a clear message to everyone in the market. Cooper saw old Mrs. Chun from the flower stand trying to salvage what she could of her destroyed inventory, tears streaming down her face. The rage Cooper had been suppressing threatened to boil over. 8 years of watching, waiting, and maintaining his cover while the Storm Riders terrorized innocent people. But he couldn't blow his operation, not when he was so close to exposing their entire weapons trafficking network. He had to stay in character for just a little longer. Cooper raised trembling hands, his voice cracking. "Please, I'll get your money. Just give me until tomorrow." Python sneered, shoving Cooper back against his truck hard enough to rock the vehicle. "Tomorrow? I don't think you're understanding the urgency of the situation." He glanced at his phone again, checking the time. Cooper noted the gesture, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Brick," Python called out. "Show our friend what happens when people try to delay the inevitable." Brick grinned, reaching into his jacket. The movement exposed a glimpse of something that made Cooper's blood run cold, the distinctive grip of a modified MAC-10 submachine gun. The weapons shipment wasn't just arriving today. The Storm Riders were already armed with military-grade hardware. Before Brick could fully draw the weapon, a police siren wailed in the distance. Python's had snapped toward the sound, his expression darkening. Looks like someone called the cops. His eyes swept the market, landing on Sarah Martinez, who was still clutching her phone. Remember that. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Cooper watched as Sarah shrank back, terror evident on her face. She'd been running her family's produce stand for 3 generations, and now she was caught in the crossfire of something far bigger than local gang intimidation. "Pack it up, boys," Python barked. "We've got other business to handle." He turned back to Cooper, jabbing a finger into his chest. "This isn't over, old man. When we come back, you better have our money and a little extra to make up for today's inconvenience." The Storm Riders mounted their bikes, engines roaring to life in a coordinated chorus of intimidation. As they peeled out of the market, Cooper caught snippets of their conversation over the engine noise. Warehouse and shipment confirmed what he'd suspected. The weapons were being moved today. Tom Baker was helping his brother to his feet, both men bruised, but their pride hurt worse than their bodies. Around the market, vendors emerged from hiding to survey the damage. Decades of hard work lay scattered and broken across the pavement. Cooper made a show of shakily picking up his scattered produce, but his mind was racing. The Storm Riders had revealed more than they realized. The modified MAC-10, Ghost's hasty departure, Python's constant time-checking, all signs pointed to a major weapons transfer happening within the hour. 8 years of deep cover had led to this moment. Cooper had watched the Storm Riders grow from a local nuisance into a sophisticated weapons trafficking operation, gathering intelligence while maintaining his harmless farmer persona. Now they were moving military-grade weapons through his town, threatening his neighbors, destroying innocent lives. As the police sirens grew closer, Cooper made his decision. His mission parameters had always been clear: gather intelligence, identify the weapons pipeline, and avoid engagement. But parameters could change when civilians were at risk. The Storm Riders had crossed a line, and Cooper couldn't wait any longer for official authorization. It was time to end this, one way or another. As he helped Mrs. Chin salvage what remained of her flowers, Cooper began calculating ranges, angles, and approach vectors to the Millbrook warehouse. The Storm Riders thought they'd intimidated a helpless farmer. Instead, they'd just activated one of the most lethal combat specialists in modern warfare. The game was about to change. Cooper waited until the police finished taking statements, playing the role of the shaken farmer to perfection. As the crowd dispersed, he approached the Baker brothers, who were nursing their injuries on the tailgate of Tom's truck. "You boys didn't have to do that," Cooper said, his voice still trembling for the benefit of any lingering observers. He pulled a burner phone from his pocket, keeping it concealed between them. "But since you did, how about we discuss it over coffee? Gregory's Diner, 20 minutes. Tom's eyes narrowed at the phone, his military training picking up the subtle shift in Cooper's demeanor. "Yeah, coffee sounds good." He studied Cooper's face. "Might know some folks who'd want to join us." Cooper nodded, understanding the implication. Tom's network of veteran truckers could be valuable assets. "Bring them. And Tom, come in through the back." As the brothers drove off, Cooper made his way to his truck, cataloging everything he'd need from his hidden cache. The Storm Riders had shown their hand: military-grade weapons, organized distribution, professional protocols. This wasn't just a gang selling stolen pistols anymore. Gregory's Diner sat at the edge of town, its neon sign flickering in the late morning sun. Cooper entered through the kitchen, nodding to Gregory himself, another veteran who'd chosen small-town life after 3 tours in Afghanistan. The older man's eyes held recognition. He'd seen the same signs Cooper had. "Back room's ready," Gregory said, his voice low. "Called in some favors. You've got 2 hours before the lunch rush." Cooper slipped through the swinging doors to find the Baker brothers already waiting, along with 3 other men he recognized from the trucking community. But it was the figure in the corner that made him pause: Sarah Martinez, her eyes still red but her jaw set with determination. "They threaten my family," she said before Cooper could speak. "I want in." Cooper shed his frightened farmer persona like an old coat. His posture straightened, voice dropping to the commanding tone he hadn't used in 8 years. "What I'm about to tell you puts you all at risk. Anyone who wants to leave, do it now." No questions asked. Nobody moved. All right. Cooper pulled out a detailed map of Eagle's Rest and the surrounding area. For the past 8 years, I've been tracking a weapons trafficking operation that makes the Iron Pipeline look like a kid's lemonade stand. The Storm Riders are just the visible part of a network that stretches from here to Mexico. Tom leaned forward, his military training evident in his focused gaze. That MAC-10 brick was carrying modified selector switch, custom grip, military spec. Good eye. Cooper pointed to the Millbrook warehouse district. They're moving a major shipment through there within the hour. But they've got numbers, heavy weapons, and home field advantage. We need to be smart about this. One of the truckers, a weathered man named Marcus, cleared his throat. Been watching those warehouses for months. Loading docks on the east side see action every Tuesday, like clockwork. Trucks with Mexican plates. They've been using our routes. Another trucker added, his face flushing with anger. Hiding in plain sight, mixing with legitimate cargo. Cooper nodded, pieces falling into place. Sarah, your family stand gives you a clear view of their usual meeting spot. What patterns have you noticed? Sarah straightened, her produced seller's memory proving invaluable. They meet every Tuesday and Friday around noon. But today was different. Python kept checking his phone, seemed nervous. And that one they call Ghost. He's never come to the market before. Ghost is their weapons supplier, Cooper explained, pulling out surveillance photos he'd gathered over the years. Marcus Williams, ex-military, dishonorable discharge. He's the link between the Storm Riders and their international suppliers. Tom studied the photos, recognition flickering in his eyes. Saw him at Pete's gas station last week. He was meeting with some suits, didn't fit the usual biker crowd. Cartel representatives, Cooper confirmed. They're scaling up operations, moving from handguns to military hardware. Today's shipment is their biggest yet. Gregory entered with coffee and closed the door behind him. Got word from my cousin at the truck stop. Storm Riders are gathering, at least 20 bikes. They're calling in muscle from other chapters. Cooper spread out another map, this one showing the warehouse interior from memory. They're expecting resistance, but not from us. Local gangs have been pushing back against their expansion. That works in our favor. They'll be looking for a frontal assault, not a surgical strike. What's the play? Tom asked, military training taking over. We're outnumbered and outgunned. We use that. Cooper began marking positions on the map. They're expecting a gang war, not coordinated military tactics. Tom, how many of your trucker network can we trust? 10, maybe 12. All vets, all reliable. Sarah leaned forward. My brothers work construction. They've got access to heavy equipment, and they've been wanting to push back against the Storm Riders for years. Good. Cooper checked his watch. We've got 90 minutes before the shipment arrives. Here's what we need. Marcus, your knowledge of the loading docks is crucial. Tom, get your network in position here and here. He marked 2 intersections. Block their escape routes, but make it look like normal traffic. Gregory emerged from the kitchen again, this time with an older man Cooper recognized as Frank Torres, the retired sheriff. Heard you might need some legitimate law enforcement perspective, Frank said, his badge-shaped tan line still visible on his chest. More than that, Cooper replied. We need your connections. How fast can you get hold of state police without alerting local channels? Frank's eyes narrowed. You thinking we've got leaks? Storm Riders have been operating too smoothly for too long. They're getting tipped off about checkpoints, raids, everything. But today's shipment is too big for them to postpone, even with advance warning. The room grew quiet as implications sank in. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. That's why they've been so bold. They thought nobody would stop them. Until now. Cooper pointed to the warehouse blueprints. Frank, we need state police here in 2 hours, not a minute sooner. We'll gather the evidence, track the suppliers, and gift wrap this whole operation for them. And the Storm Riders?
Tom asked.
They made a mistake targeting this market. Cooper's voice hardened. They thought they were terrorizing helpless civilians. Instead, they found a community of veterans, truckers, and people who've had enough. We're not just gathering evidence, we're we're shutting them down. The meeting shifted into rapid planning. Gregory's contact list proved invaluable, reaching out to other business owners who'd suffered under the storm riders' extortion. Sarah's construction worker brothers began positioning equipment for roadblocks. Tom's trucker network spread the word through CB radios, coordinating movements to look random while establishing a perfect cordon. Cooper watched the collaboration with growing appreciation. 8 years of isolation, maintaining his cover while gathering intelligence, had taken its toll. But here, in this back room of a small-town diner, he'd found something unexpected, a community ready to fight back.
Oh.
Any hour, he announced, checking his phone. Everyone clear on their positions? Nods around the room. These weren't trained military operators, but they had something just as valuable: intimate knowledge of their town and a burning desire to protect it. Remember, Cooper said, his voice carrying the weight of command, we're not looking for a fight. We're gathering evidence and containing the situation until state police arrive. But if the storm riders choose to escalate, he met each person's eyes. We'll show them what this community is really made of. As the group dispersed through the back door, Sarah lingered. They thought we were weak, she said quietly. They thought they could just roll in and take whatever they wanted. Cooper squeezed her shoulder, feeling the tension of 8 years of undercover work finally approaching its end. That's always their mistake, he replied. Thinking that quiet people are soft people. Thinking that farmers and truckers and shop owners can't fight back. They'll learn, Sarah said, her voice steel. Yes, Cooper agreed, checking his weapon one last time. They will. The Millbrook warehouse district lay silent under the midday sun, its corrugated metal walls reflecting heat in shimmering waves. Cooper crouched behind a stack of empty pallets, his farmer's flannel replaced with dark tactical gear from his emergency cache. Through his scope, he watched Ghost pace near the loading dock, checking his phone every 30 seconds. Eagle 1, this is Truck 3. Tom's voice crackled through the earpiece. Got 2 more bikes coming in from the south entrance. Armed. Cooper clicked his radio twice in acknowledgement, adjusting his count. 23 storm riders now. More than expected. Through his scope, he could see them positioning bikes to block potential escape routes, standard military protocol. These weren't just gang members. Some had training. Market team? Status? Cooper whispered. Sarah's voice came back steady. 6 of them just left the market, heading your way. Pythons with them. They're carrying duffel bags, heavy ones. Moving weapons to the meet, just as predicted. Cooper shifted his position, getting a better angle on the warehouse's main entrance. Ghost had disappeared inside, but activity near the loading bay suggested the shipment was arriving ahead of schedule. Construction team, are we set? One of Sarah's brothers responded. Equipment in position. They won't get through the east exit when this goes down. Cooper watched as more storm riders arrived, their formations telling him everything he needed to know. They were nervous, positioning lookouts with overlapping fields of fire. This wasn't just another weapons transfer, something bigger was happening. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled into the loading bay, followed by 2 more.
Mexican Plates, Diplomatic Tax.
Cooper's pulse quickened. The cartel representatives weren't supposed to be here in person. This wasn't just a shipment, it was a full demonstration. All teams hold positions, Cooper ordered. We've got high-value targets on site. Do not engage without my signal. Through his scope, Cooper watched as men in expensive suits emerged from the SUVs. Ghost greeted them with a deference that confirmed their importance. Python and his group arrived moments later, the duffel bags now visible. Cooper zoomed in on the exchange, documenting everything. That's when he saw it. One of the cartel members was carrying a metal briefcase, the kind used for specialized military hardware. Cooper's blood ran cold as he recognized the marking, a prototype weapon system that had gone missing from a military base 3 months ago. Change of plans, he whispered into his radio. This just got bigger than we thought. Frank, you copy? The retired sheriff's voice came back tense. Reading you. State police are staged 20 minutes out. Tell them we need tactical support. This isn't just guns anymore. They're dealing in classified military tech. A sudden commotion drew Cooper's attention back to the warehouse entrance. Two storm riders were dragging someone between them, a local teenager who'd apparently wandered too close. The kid's skateboard clattered to the ground as they hauled him toward Python. Complications, Cooper reported. They've got a civilian. Young male, maybe 16. That's Danny Chen. Sarah's voice shook slightly. Mrs. Chen's grandson. He helps her at the market sometimes. Cooper watched as Python questioned the terrified teenager, his posture growing more aggressive by the second. The cartel representatives were getting nervous, their hands straying toward concealed weapons. The situation was degrading rapidly. All teams, prepare to execute, Cooper ordered. Prioritize the civilian safety. On my mark, we light this place up like the 4th of July. Python shoved Danny against the warehouse wall, pressing a knife to his throat. Who sent you? Who are you working for? The teenager's protests were cut short by a rough shake. I swear, I was just skating. I didn't see anything. Cooper's finger tensed on his radio trigger. The cartel representatives were retreating toward their SUVs, the weapons demonstration forgotten in the face of potential surveillance. Ghost followed them, trying to salvage the situation, but Cooper could see the deal unraveling. He's just a kid, one of the storm riders said, shifting uncomfortably. Python spun toward him. Just a kid who happened to show up during a major deal? Check his phone. Check everything. The moment Python turned, Danny made his move. He ducked and twisted, breaking free exactly as Cooper had seen Mrs. Chen do in her self-defense classes at the community center. The boy was halfway to his skateboard when Brick caught him with a meaty hand. Now, Cooper barked into his radio. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah's brothers activated their construction equipment, the massive machines roaring to life and blocking the eastern exit. Tom's trucker network moved their rigs into position, sealing off escape routes with practiced precision. Cooper squeezed off 2 shots in rapid succession. The first took out the front tire of the lead SUV, the second disabled Python's motorcycle. The cartel representatives dove for cover as their drivers frantically tried to maneuver in the suddenly confined space. Target the bikes, Cooper ordered. Don't let them scatter. From multiple positions, veterans from Tom's network opened fire with hunting rifles, methodically disabling motorcycles. The storm riders scrambled for cover, their formation dissolving into chaos. Ghost was screaming into his phone, trying to coordinate a response, but the attackers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Brick shoved Danny aside as he reached for his weapon, giving Cooper the opening he needed. A rubber bullet caught Brick in the chest, dropping him like a stone. The teenager bolted, diving behind a dumpster as the air filled with the sound of gunfire and squealing tires. Python was shouting orders, trying to rally his men, but the storm riders were coming apart. Some tried to run, only to find their escape routes blocked by broken-down trucks. Others returned fire blindly, their shots wild and ineffective against attackers they couldn't see. West side clear, Tom reported. They're bottled up. Cooper watched through his scope as the cartel representatives abandoned their SUVs, fleeing toward a secondary vehicle hidden behind the warehouse. He let them go. They weren't the primary targets, and their escape would only add to the chaos. Package is moving, he reported, spotting Ghost trying to escape with the briefcase of military hardware. Sarah, you're up. Right on cue, a delivery van burst through a side gate, Sarah at the wheel. She swerved hard, cutting off Ghost's escape route, then ducked as bullets peppered her reinforced vehicle. The distraction was enough. Cooper put a rubber round into Ghost's leg, sending him sprawling. The briefcase skittered across the pavement. Python emerged from behind a stack of crates, his face contorted with rage as he realized the trap they'd fallen into. Who are you people? He screamed, firing wildly at the surrounding buildings. Cooper's voice carried across the chaos, amplified by the warehouse walls. We're the community you tried to destroy. He put another round into a motorcycle's gas tank, the explosion adding to the confusion. The people you thought were weak. The storm riders' resistance was crumbling. Their military-grade weapons were useless against an enemy they couldn't locate, their tactical training meaningless in the face of superior strategy. One by one, they started surrendering, dropping weapons and raising hands. But Python wasn't finished. He grabbed Danny, who had tried to make a run for safety, and dragged him toward the warehouse interior. "Fall back," he ordered his remaining men. "Get inside. Use the high ground. Don't let them fortify," Cooper commanded. "Sarah now." Sarah's van crashed through the warehouse's side door, taking it off its hinges. The storm riders diving for cover found themselves caught in the glare of powerful floodlights mounted on the vehicle. In the chaos, Danny broke free again, this time making it to safety behind Sarah's van. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Ghost shouted from where he lay clutching his leg. "This is bigger than your little town." "We know exactly what we're dealing with," Cooper replied, emerging from his position. His farmer's disguise was gone, replaced by the deadly efficiency of a Delta Force operator. "The weapons, the cartel connection, the military tech, we've known for months." Python stared in dawning comprehension. "The farmer, it was all a setup? 8 years of watching you destroy lives." Cooper's voice was cold. 8 years of gathering intelligence while you thought you were untouchable. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. State police tactical units would be arriving any minute, but the hard work was already done. The storm riders were contained, their weapons seized, their operation exposed. "Clear the warehouse," Cooper ordered. "Secure any survivors." Tom's veterans moved with practiced efficiency, clearing the building room by room. Sarah helped Danny to safety while her brothers used construction equipment to block any remaining escape routes. The community had come together with military precision, turning the storm riders' own tactics against them. In the end, Python was the last to surrender, emerging with his hands raised as tactical units flooded the area. Cooper watched as state police began processing the scene, their expressions shifting from skepticism to amazement as they discovered the extent of the weapons cache. "You've been busy," Frank said, joining Cooper as Python was led away in handcuffs.
"We all have."
Cooper looked around at the gathered townspeople, truckers, veterans, market vendors, all united against a common enemy. They never understood what they were really dealing with. Sarah approached, supporting Danny, who looked shaken but unharmed. "Mrs. Chen's on her way," she reported. "And Cooper? The market vendors want to know when you're coming back to sell those tomatoes." A ghost of a smile crossed Cooper's face. The operation was over, his cover blown, but somehow he knew he'd be staying in Eagle's Rest. Some things were worth more than a mission. The aftermath of the warehouse raids stretched into the evening. Cooper sat alone in Gregory's diner, his tactical gear replaced with his familiar flannel shirt, watching state police vehicles move through the streets like fireflies. The coffee in front of him had gone cold, but he barely noticed, lost in thoughts of the past 8 years. Gregory placed a fresh cup in front of him, sliding into the booth. "You know, when you first showed up here, I had you pegged as military. Figured you were just another vet looking for quiet." He stirred his own coffee. "Never guessed Delta Force." Cooper's fingers traced the rim of his cup. That was the point. 8 years ago, when intelligence identified Eagle's Rest as a potential weapons corridor, they needed someone who could disappear. Become invisible. He smiled faintly. What better cover than an overweight farmer who could barely keep his tomatoes from spoiling? But it wasn't all cover, was it? Gregory's question cut to the heart of Cooper's conflict. The diner's bell chimed as Sarah entered, followed by Tom Baker. They joined the booth without invitation, part of Cooper's world now whether he wanted it or not. "The reporting office called," Sarah said, her voice soft. "They want your official statement about the operation. About everything." Cooper nodded, his mind drifting to the moment 8 years ago when he'd first received his assignment. He'd been the perfect choice, a Delta Force operator with agricultural experience from his family's farm in Nebraska. The plan had been simple: establish a cover, gather intelligence, and coordinate with federal agencies to shut down the weapons pipeline. "I wasn't supposed to put down roots," Cooper admitted, finally voicing what had been haunting him. The mission was observation only. No connections, no friendships, nothing that could compromise the operation. He looked at the people around him, the diner owner who'd become his confidant, the market vendor who'd shown more courage than many soldiers he'd known, the trucker who'd risked everything to help without hesitation.
But you did, Tom said.
You became part of this place. Cooper reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. It showed a younger version of himself in full military gear, standing with his Delta Force team in an unnamed desert. Before Eagle's Rest, this was my whole world. The mission, the team, the objective. Everything else was just. He paused, searching for the words. Background? Gregory offered. Exactly. Cooper set the photo on the table. I was good at it.
The best.
Could become anyone. Adapt to any situation. But after a while, you start to forget who you really are. Sarah studied the photograph. And who are you, James Cooper? The question hit him harder than any punch he'd taken today. In the reflection of the diner's window, he saw himself, not the lean soldier from the photograph, not even the overweight farmer he'd pretended to be. Something in between, something real. I started growing actual tomatoes, Cooper said, a hint of wonder in his voice. Not for the cover story, I already had that established. I grew them because I wanted to. Because I remembered how my father's hands looked after a day in the fields, how proud he was of every harvest. Tom leaned forward. The mission didn't require that. No, Cooper agreed. Just like it didn't require me to help Mrs. Chen set up her flower stand every morning, or teach self-defense classes at the community center, or... He gestured to the people around him. Or make friends I knew I'd have to leave behind. Sarah reached across the table, her hand covering the photograph. Maybe that's why you were the right person for this mission. Not because you could pretend to be a farmer, but because part of you already was one. The diner's kitchen radio crackled with updates about the raid. State police had found more than weapons in the warehouse, documents, shipping manifests, connection to other cells across the country. Cooper's 8-year operation had exposed a network that would take months to fully unravel. Command called, Cooper said quietly. They're pleased with the outcome. Said I exceeded mission parameters. But, Gregory prompted. But now they want me back. New assignment, new identity, new. He gestured to the window, to the town beyond. New everything. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Cooper thought about his childhood on the farm, the years of military service that followed, and the strange peace he'd found in this small town. He'd arrived as a warrior in disguise, but somewhere along the way, the disguise had become as real as the man beneath it. You know, Tom said, breaking the silence, my brother Mike started talking about expanding the trucking business. Said we could use someone with logistics experience, someone who knows the area. Gregory nodded. Market's going to need reorganizing too, after today. People trust you, Cooper. Not the cover story you. And my produce stand could use a reliable supplier, Sarah added with a small smile. Someone who knows their way around a tomato plant. Cooper stared into his coffee, seeing his reflection ripple with each small movement. Years of training had taught him to stay detached, to never form connections that could compromise his judgment. But sitting here, in this small-town diner with people who'd fought beside him not because of orders but because of trust, he realized something profound. When I first got the assignment, he said slowly, they told me to become part of the community. To blend in so completely that no one would ever suspect who I really was. He looked up at his friends. I followed that order too well. Because somewhere between the farmer's market and today's raid, I stopped pretending. The diner's door chimed again, and Mrs. Chun entered with Danny. The teenager looked embarrassed, but determined as he approached their booth. I wanted to say thank you, Danny said, standing straighter than Cooper had ever seen him. And I was wondering if those self-defense classes are still happening. Cooper felt something shift inside him, a final piece falling into place. They're happening, though we might need to adjust the curriculum a bit. He looked at Mrs. Chun. Your grandson's got good instincts. That escape move he used today? Perfect execution. Mrs. Chun beamed with pride, and Cooper remembered all the mornings she'd attended his classes, quietly practicing each move until she got it right. He told himself it was part of his cover, that teaching the community to defend themselves would help sell his story. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. Command doesn't know about the classes, do they? Sarah asked softly. Cooper shook his head. Or the farming workshops, or the veteran support group meetings, or... He straightened in his seat, decision crystallizing. Or a lot of things that matter more than another assignment. Tom nodded, understanding in his eyes. So, what are you going to tell them? Cooper pulled out his phone, where a message from his handlers awaited response. 8 years of following orders, of putting the mission first, of being whoever they needed him to be. He thought about the weight he'd gained, not as a disguise, but as a natural result of finding peace. About the calluses on his hands from actual farming, not just pretending. The truth, he said finally, that I completed the mission, exposed the weapons pipeline, and helped bring down a major trafficking operation. He looked around at the faces of people who had become more than just part of his cover story. And that I'm staying. They won't like that, Gregory warned. No, Cooper agreed. But they'll understand. Because today proved something important. This community, these connections we've built, they're not a liability. They're the reason we succeeded. Sarah smiled. From undercover operator to actual farmer. Your father would be proud. Cooper touched the photograph one last time before sliding it back into his pocket. He would be, but not because of the operation or the raid. He looked out at the town where he'd found not just a cover story, but a home. He'd be proud because I finally learned what he always knew. Sometimes the most important battles aren't won with weapons or tactics, but with trust and patience, and... Tomatoes? Danny suggested with a grin. Cooper laughed, the sound genuine and free. Yeah, kid. Tomatoes. He stood up, decision made. Now, who's going to help me rebuild my produce stand? Those storm riders made quite a mess this morning. The response was immediate and unanimous. As Cooper looked at the people around him, the veteran diner owner, the brave market vendor, the skilled truckers, the determined grandmother and her grandson, he knew he'd made the right choice. He'd come to Eagle's Rest to play a role, but he'd stay because he'd finally found himself. The calm lasted exactly 3 days. Cooper was restocking his rebuilt produce stand when Tom's truck skidded to a stop in front of the market. They're coming back, Tom said, his face grim. All of them. Cooper's hands stilled on a crate of tomatoes. How many? State police intercepted radio chatter. 3 chapters of storm riders converging on Eagle's Rest. They're calling in every favor, every ally. Tom's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Python escaped custody during transport. He's leading them. Cooper's mind raced through calculations. The weapons cache was gone, secured by federal authorities. The cartel connection was severed. This wasn't about business anymore, it was about revenge. They'll hit at dawn, Tom continued. Classic military strategy. Python's not playing gang leader anymore. He's fighting a war. Then we'll give him one, Cooper said, already reaching for his phone. Get everyone to Gregory's.
Now.
Within an hour, the diner's back room was packed. Sarah, the Baker brothers, Mrs. Chun, and 24 others, veterans, truckers, farmers, all wearing the same determined expression. The town's new sheriff, Frank Torres, spread a map across the table. State police are stretched thin with a prison riot in Carson City, Frank reported. Earliest backup is 6 hours out. We're on our own. Cooper studied the map, his Delta Force training overlaying potential strategies. How many riders? At least 60, Tom answered. Maybe more. They've got heavy weapons, military gear stripped from the warehouse before we hit it. Python's been planning this. Of course he has. Cooper traced routes through the town. He's not just coming for revenge. He's coming to make an example of us. To show every small town in their territory what happens when people fight back. Sarah leaned forward. Then, he doesn't know this town very well. Cooper looked around the room, seeing not civilians but warriors. Mrs. Chun, who'd mastered joint locks in his defense classes. The Baker brothers, whose trucking routes had helped map the storm riders' movements. Sarah, who'd driven through gunfire without flinching. Python thinks he's bringing an army, Cooper said. But he's forgotten something important. We're not defending a town. He met each person's gaze. We're defending our home. The plan came together quickly. Cooper's military expertise merged with local knowledge. Every alley, every rooftop, every advantage they could leverage. They had something the Storm Riders didn't: intimate knowledge of the battlefield. "They'll expect us to fortify the police station," Frank said. "Try to hold out for reinforcements." Cooper shook his head. "That's exactly what we won't do." Python's thinking like a soldier now, expecting conventional tactics. "We'll give him something else entirely." He turned to Sarah. "Your construction equipment still in place? Ready to roll. My brothers can have them positioned in 10 minutes.
Good.
Tom, how many of your truckers can we count on?" "All of them." Tom's voice was steel. "Every rig within 50 miles is headed here." Cooper nodded, the strategy crystallizing. They think they're coming to punish a weak town. Instead, they're riding into a trap 8 years in the making. Dawn painted the sky in shades of blood as the first rumble of motorcycles echoed through Eagle's Rest. Cooper stood on the roof of Gregory's Diner, watching the eastern approach. The town below looked deserted, every storefront dark, every street empty.
Perfect.
"They're splitting into 3 groups," Tom's voice crackled through the radio. "Just like you said they would." Cooper tracked the approaching formations through his scope. Python led the main force down Main Street, with smaller groups flanking through side roads. Their weapons glinted in the early light, military-grade hardware, just as reported. "Remember," Cooper broadcast to all channels, "we're not trying to win a shooting war. We're fighting on our terms, our territory." The trap was laid with precision born of intimate knowledge. Every piece of construction equipment, every parked truck, every apparent escape route had been carefully positioned. The Storm Riders were following a script 8 years in the writing, and they didn't even know it. Python's voice carried across the empty streets, amplified by megaphone. "Come out, Cooper. Face us like a soldier." "Patience," Cooper murmured to his people. "Let them commit." The Storm Riders advanced cautiously, their military training evident in their formation. Cooper had counted on that, had counted on Python turning this into a military operation. Because that's not what it was at all. The first phase triggered when the flanking groups reached Thompson Street. Sarah's brothers activated the construction equipment they'd positioned days ago, massive machines roaring to life and blocking the side streets. The riders' neat formation dissolved as they crowded into Main Street, exactly as planned. "Now," Cooper ordered. Every sprinkler system in downtown burst to life, not with water, but with a mixture that turned the street into an ice rink. Bikes skidded, riders cursed, and the tight military formation became a liability. From the rooftops, defenders armed with paint guns and rubber rounds opened fire, targeting weapons and visors. Python screamed orders, trying to regain control, but Cooper had designed this battle to negate every advantage of military training. This wasn't a war zone. It was Main Street, where Mrs. Chun had taught him the proper way to arrange flowers, where Sarah's produce stand had become the heart of the community, where life happened in all its messy, ordinary glory. "You think this will stop us?" Python's voice was rage incarnate. "We'll burn this town to the ground." "No," Cooper replied, his voice carrying across the chaos. "You won't." The second phase began. Tom's truckers moved in perfect coordination, their rigs emerging from side streets to form an impenetrable wall. The Storm Riders found themselves boxed in, their superior numbers meaningless in the confined space. Cooper watched through his scope as Python finally realized the truth. This wasn't a battle between soldiers. This was a town defending itself, using every tool, every advantage, every bit of knowledge gained over years of actual community. "You're finished, Python," Cooper's voice echoed across the street. "Your cartel connections are exposed. Your weapons pipeline is shut down. The only thing you're doing now is adding years to your sentence." Python's response was a burst of gunfire that shattered the diner's windows. Cooper didn't flinch. He'd known Python would choose this path, would choose violence over surrender, pride over sense. "Everyone in position," Cooper ordered. "Execute final phase." The town's fire trucks, positioned strategically the day before, roared to life. High-pressure hoses turned the confined space into chaos, the water mixed with crowd control foam. Storm riders who had survived military operations found themselves stripped of visibility, communication, and mobility. But Python wasn't finished. He abandoned his bike, charging through the foam toward the diner, toward Cooper. His military training showed in how he moved, using cover, maintaining his balance on the slick street. "You think you understand war?" Python screamed. "You're nothing but a farmer." Cooper stood, removing his flannel shirt to reveal the tactical gear beneath. "You're right." He grabbed a zip line they'd installed the night before. "I am a farmer." He launched himself down the line, years of Delta Force training merging with the strength earned from actual farm work. Python raised his weapon, but Cooper was already moving, closing the distance with brutal efficiency. The fight was swift and decisive. Python's military training met Cooper's experience, but there was a crucial difference. Python fought with rage, with wounded pride, with the desperation of a man who had lost everything. Cooper fought with the quiet confidence of someone who had found what mattered. The final blow sent Python sprawling. Cooper stood over him as state police sirens finally filled the air. "You're right," Cooper said quietly. "I am a farmer. I'm also the man who spent 8 years watching you terrorize good people. The man who taught those people to defend themselves. The man who finally found something worth fighting for besides orders." The Storm Riders were surrendering now, their military discipline broken by the realization that they'd been outmaneuvered not by another army, but by a community. By florists and truckers, farmers and waitresses, all fighting with the strength of people protecting their home. Sarah appeared through the clearing foam, tossing Cooper his farmer's hat. "Got some tomatoes that need picking when you're done here." Cooper caught the hat, placing it on his head as state police tactical units began securing the scene. The Storm Riders' attempt to make an example of Eagle's Rest had failed spectacularly. Instead, they'd become an example themselves of what happened when a community stood together. "You lost the moment you came back," Cooper told the handcuffed Python, "because you never understood what you were really fighting. This isn't about soldiers or gangs or power." He looked around at the town that had become his home, at the people who had become his family. "This is about community. And that's something worth defending." Dawn broke fully over Eagle's Rest as Cooper helped Mrs. Chin sweep broken glass from the diner's entrance. The battle was over, but the day's work was just beginning. There were vegetables to tend, deliveries to make, lives to live. And he wouldn't have it any other way. A week after the Storm Riders' final stand, Eagle's Rest buzzed with an energy it hadn't known in years. The farmers' market had reopened, its stalls repaired and reinforced, now a symbol of the town's resilience. Cooper stood at his produce stand, arranging tomatoes with the same precision he'd once used to plan military operations. "The FBI's here again," Sarah said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Cooper. "They're still trying to understand how a small town managed to take down 3 chapters of Storm Riders." Cooper accepted the coffee, noting how the market's atmosphere had changed. People moved differently now, with quiet confidence rather than fearful glances. Mrs. Chen's flower stand had twice as many customers as before, many stopping to admire her new self-defense class schedule prominently displayed beside the roses. "Let them wonder," Cooper replied. "Some things don't translate well to official reports." The aftermath of the battle had brought changes nobody could have predicted. National media had descended on Eagle's Rest, expecting to find a town traumatized by violence. Instead, they discovered a community stronger than ever, its people bound together by more than just geography. "Got something for you." Tom Baker approached, carrying a thick envelope. State police finished their investigation of the Storm Riders' documents. "Thought you'd want to see this." Cooper opened the envelope, spreading photos across his stand. 8 years of surveillance, weapons deals, cartel connections, all leading to Eagle's Rest. His original mission had been to gather intelligence, to map the network. Nobody had expected the solution to come from the community itself. "My contact at the FBI says they're using us as a case study," Frank added, joining the group. The retired sheriff looked pleased. "Teaching other small towns how to build community resistance to organized crime." "They're missing the point," Cooper said, watching Danny Chin help his grandmother rearrange her flower display. The teenager had become a regular at the self-defense classes, bringing half his high school friends with him. You can't teach what we have here. It has to grow on its own. Sarah picked up one of the surveillance photos, showing the Storm Riders at the height of their power. Hard to believe they thought they could just roll in and take over. That we'd be an easy target. That was their mistake, Cooper agreed. They saw what they expected to see. Isolated individuals, easy to intimidate. They never understood what makes a community strong. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the market as more customers arrived. Cooper noticed how they greeted each other differently now, with the warmth of people who had stood together in crisis. The Battle of Eagles Rest, as the media had dubbed it, had changed more than just the town's security. Gregory arrived with fresh pastries, his diner having become an unofficial command center during the Reconstruction. "Got a call from my cousin in Carlton County," he said, setting down the box. "Their sheriff wants to know how we did it. Says they've got similar problems brewing." Cooper considered this as he adjusted his farmer's hat, no longer a disguise, but a genuine part of who he was. "Tell them to start with breakfast," he said finally. "Breakfast?" Frank raised an eyebrow. 8 years ago, when I first arrived, Mrs. Chin invited me to breakfast at Gregory's. Said no one should start farming without understanding the community first. Cooper smiled at the memory. "I thought it was just part of maintaining my cover. Didn't realize she was teaching me the most important lesson of all." Sarah nodded, understanding. "That real strength doesn't come from weapons or tactics. It comes from knowing your neighbor has your back," Tom added. "From understanding that every person has something to contribute." The market had filled with customers now, including faces Cooper didn't recognize, people from neighboring towns, drawn by the story of Eagles Rest's resistance. They wandered between stalls, asking questions, studying the repaired buildings still bearing scars from the battle. "My command called again," Cooper said quietly. "Offered me my choice of assignments. Said I could write my own ticket after this success." The group fell silent, tension crackling in the air. Cooper let it stretch for a moment before continuing. "I told them I already had an assignment." He picked up a perfectly ripe tomato, feeling its weight. "Got crops to tend, classes to teach, a community to help protect. Not as a soldier or an operator, but as a farmer who finally found his place." The relief around him was palpable. Gregory clapped him on the shoulder, and Sarah's smile could have lit up the whole market. Even Frank's usually stern expression softened. "Besides," Cooper added, "somebody has to help Tom expand his trucking business. Build some legitimate shipping routes to replace the ones the Storm Riders were using." "Already got 3 new contracts," Tom confirmed. "Turns out when you save a town from a biker gang, people want to do business with you." A commotion at the market entrance drew their attention. Danny Chin was leading a group of teenagers, all wearing t-shirts with a new design, a tomato crossed with a self-defense stance. The back read, "Eagles Rest Strong." "Those shirts were Sarah's idea," Mrs. Chin said proudly, joining the group. "The kids have sold hundreds already. All proceeds go to rebuilding the community center." Cooper watched as Danny demonstrated a basic self-defense move to his friends, his technique perfect. The teenager caught Cooper's eye and grinned, offering a respectful bow that merged martial arts discipline with small-town charm. "You know," Frank mused, "when I first retired as sheriff, I worried about this town. Thought we were too small, too isolated to handle the changing world." He gestured at the bustling market. "Never thought our salvation would come from a Delta Force operator pretending to be a farmer." "That's where you're wrong," Cooper replied. "The salvation didn't come from me. It came from Mrs. Chin teaching self-defense to her granddaughter's friends. From Sarah refusing to be intimidated. From Tom's truckers choosing to stand their ground. I just helped reveal what was already here." A young family approached Cooper's stand, their little girl pointing excitedly at the tomatoes. As Cooper helped them select the ripest ones, sharing tips on storage and preparation, he felt the last pieces of his old life settling into place alongside the new. "You really are a farmer now," Sarah observed after the family left. "That wasn't advice from a cover story. You actually care about those tomatoes." Cooper looked around at the market, at the town beyond, at the community that had become so much more than just a mission. 8 years ago, I came here to stop weapons trafficking, to gather intelligence and expose a criminal network. I thought I was just playing a role, becoming what the mission needed. He adjusted a crate of fresh vegetables, his movements sure and practiced. But somewhere along the way, Eagle's Rest taught me something my years in Delta Force never could. That sometimes the strongest weapons aren't guns or tactics or training. Sometimes they're fresh tomatoes and morning coffee, flower arrangements and self-defense classes, neighbors who become family, and a community that refuses to be broken. The market hummed with life around them, its rhythm as natural as breathing. Mrs. Chin was teaching a group of elderly ladies the same joint lock that had helped Danny escape during the battle. Tom's truckers were unloading fresh produce, their routes now serving legitimate businesses instead of tracking criminal movements. Sarah's stand displayed not just vegetables, but a bulletin board of community events, each one a thread in the fabric of their shared life. "So, what happens now?" Gregory asked, pouring fresh coffee for everyone. Cooper smiled, feeling the weight of his farmer's hat, no longer a disguise but a badge of honor.
Now?
Now we do what we've always done. We grow things. We build things. We protect what matters. He looked at the faces around him, at the town that had taken in a soldier and turned him into something more. And we remember that the greatest victories aren't won with violence, but with courage and compassion and community. The morning sun climbed higher over Eagle's Rest, its light catching on windows repaired after the battle, on fresh, paint-covering scars, on faces marked not by fear but by determination. In the end, Cooper realized, his most successful mission hadn't been exposing the weapons pipeline or defeating the Storm Riders. It had been becoming exactly who he was always meant to be, a farmer, a teacher, a protector, a friend. And that was a mission he'd gladly spend the rest of his life completing.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.